Right, so...
Right, let me... You can pick it up from wherever you want to.
So, that's one who wrote Destiny by Nikesh.
I didn't realise we were starting again, don't you?
We're not even starting again. It's happening immediately after the last bit.
Oh, right. Okay, well, just cut. Oh, no, because you'll just keep it in and I'll look...
No, okay.
Two.
Oh, I don't
Take
want
two.
to look a spanner.
Right.
So that's this book which I'm really... Which I just loved. And, I think it's really great and interesting. And a really big book in terms of, like, the range of the writing. I've got other books I'm reading.
Did you give me this one? Did you give that to me? I think you did.
Oh, yeah, I did. Do you know why?
Yeah.
I judged a comic prize a few years ago. And that was one of the books, yeah.
I thought it was really good. It's all about it's beautiful. I mean the illustration is absolutely beautiful. It's a comic book, and it's all about kind of dealing with obsessive compulsive behaviour.
Yeah.
And it's if you don't know anything, and it's washing machines do play a major part in it. Washing machines and circles and patterns, and it was one of those things where I suddenly went, "It's January and I have time to read in January just," and so I got round to this, and it's a book that is beautifully put together and.
Also,
and I think of use, so it's not like lots of comic books now where you just go, such a lovely story. Behind it is someone expressing ideas which are also useful. It is pragmatic and also beautiful.
Well, I was thinking about that. Like, when I learn, I'm a note-taker learner. That's the type of learning I like. I like to sort of copy things out, draw my own charts, like definitely keep my hand in, literally, when I'm learning. And, like, learning through comic books is genuinely a very good thing. Oh, my brain is so stupid. It feels to me a really effective way of learning for some types of brain.
Yeah.
Like when I was a kid, when I first started doing philosophy A-level, I bought loads of those graphic philosophy guides just to sort of catch myself up. They're amazing.
Introducing and the beginner's guide to and all those ones, yeah.
Yeah, so good.
No, I think it's because you. I think because I'm the same as you. That scatty thing where suddenly you're reading a book and you go, "Oh no, my brain was going through all the words, but it wasn't the bit of the brain that's taking the words in." Whereas this, you just kind of go, new frame, new speech bubble, new frame, new speech bubble, new. Yeah.
But also, if you're talking about patterns and you're talking about shapes, and then you're showing patterns and shapes at the same time, it's so much more powerful than just being like, and then of course I did this. Yeah. Well, this is what I'm reading, which I think you would find really interesting. Do you know of Gay Talese?
Yeah, but I'd never read anything.
So I was recommended. I was recommended by my manager in the States. Was telling me about this article that he wrote, which was kind of a short article describing what this book is, basically. Which is that he was somebody who was very much like a John Ronson or a Louis Theroux of the 50s and 60s. Was it 60s and 70s? Sorry, my brain is absolute sponge. But what he did was he wrote this book about people's sex lives.
I've seen a bit of this film. I've seen most of this film.
There's a film of this now.
Hang on, is this the one about the bloke who made loads of holes in the motel thing and watched people having sex and stuff?
Yeah. So
it's so weird.
Yeah, it's totally weird. So this guy had a background where he'd worked in swinger clubs, and he'd sort of done lots of gonzo immersive journalism in different kind of what's the word, like countercultural sex places, and written about it. And I think the book was called Thy Neighbour's Wife, right? It was this expose. And what happened was this man read this book. It was like a big bestseller. And it's really interesting as well because the first part of this book is him sort of telling you how successful he was, and it sort of reminds you how fleeting, like, even being the #1 bestseller in America is in terms of like fame and that going on. But somebody read this and contacted him, wrote him this very official letter saying, I am a sociologist and anthropologist and I've been doing research on people. And it's basically this guy who's also like, okay, I'm a creepy voyeur and I love watching people have sex. But what he did was he sort of made all these charts and diagrams of like the sex acts witnessed. And he sort of did compile loads of data over 30 years on how people's sex lives were changing and what sex was changing how sex was changing, what that meant, and like what the thing that was interesting, the point my friend made, which was he saw the pill as like a really like overall sad negative thing for women, like seeing the effects of the pill on women's emotions and their mental state and stuff like that, but also seeing the effects of that on how people then made sex throwaway and what that meant. And like, so he did have all these like personal insights into culture and how that was changing through those things. Anyway, there's also a big twist in it which I won't give away, but it's really interesting and like has that kind of strange seediness to it as well, which is always fun. Yeah, and then this I'm reading, this was given to me by a friend of mine, Hope, a Tragedy by Shalom Auslander. And like, I haven't yet finished it, and I'm not totally sure what I think of it as a book, but the prose is so great and like funny and dense, and as a writer, I'm just so like excited by how little slack there is and how bright and energetic and funny the prose is. That is quite, yeah, I recommend it just for that, so you can sort of enjoy this person's like personal poetry and sharpness in that way. So there, what else you got to recommend?
What have I done? I'll go through them rapidly because we've run out of time. But it's this is just because I've only just started it, but we're interviewing him very soon. Waiting for the Last Bus by Richard Holloway, who also wrote Godless Morality and Between the Monster and the Saint, and just always writes very, very beautifully. The Marshmallow Test. Can you stay in a room with one marshmallow and not eat it, so you'll eventually be rewarded with two? If so, you may well grow up to have an amazing life.
Delayed gratification.
But the good thing about this book is it shows you the Marshmallow Test. This is the guy who came up with this test, where putting a child 4 years old in a room, there's the marshmallow, ring the bell if you want to eat the marshmallow, I'll come back in, it's fine, but if you don't, no. And it shows you that whatever happens though does not mean, oh, the child ate the marshmallow immediately and therefore the destiny, it's over and done with. There are lots of things for both children and adults that we can work out different systems to help us through those kind of situations of not always going with, sometimes gut instinct rushing. So I've only just I'm up to page 231, and I've made lots of little pencil marks. So obviously I liked it.
Also, it's about, yes, understanding what you are and not necessarily rushing to label that a failure or a success or a moral victory or a moral failure, and instead being like, I was talking about somebody with this because they were talking about a little boy who was always fighting, and then realising that for that particular boy it really wasn't about some sort of psychological damage. It was about him really loving physical fighting and contact, and like the idea that there are certain things that from the outset you might think, oh, this is a terrible sign, and actually genuinely funneling that into boxing training changes somebody's life for the better. And maybe that's a bit too simplistic.
Well, no, but that is part of the thing. What Walter Mischel talked about is the different. You see a child and it behaves in that kind of way, and then that child just becomes that is what that child is. And actually, very often, if you analyse what led to, whether it's fighting, whether it's bad behaviour, swearing, whatever it is, it may be many different things that lead to that. And there may be sometimes people who have tremendous, because he talks also about those people who've got to very important positions in life and therefore have had to get there, had to have tremendous self-control, but then the thing that leads to their fall, and you go, but how do they not have their self-control? So the idea that there is someone who just goes, I have self-control, no, it's a jumble.
Anthony Weiner.
Yeah, it's kind of there's a I'll just this I really enjoyed. This is
so many mother
everybody. Well, I just got a bit of time. That's Everybody Lies is basically about what we can tell about human behaviour, human desire, and human thoughts, predominantly through Google searches.
Ooh.
So this, this is if you look at what we search, it shows you, and he then looks at lots of different ideas of big data, including the importance of the left ventricle of a racehorse's heart, amongst other things. Inventing Ourselves, Secret Life of Teenage Brain. Just interviewed Sarah-Jayne Blakemore recently on Infinite Monkey Cage, and this is just. It's fascinating because it's such a recent thing, the understanding that it doesn't just go child brain, adult brain, but actually teenage brain is there's a lot of stuff, which is a separate almost structure going on at that point before, at the age of 23, 24, the adult brain settles into what that becomes.
And that makes so much sense to me. I feel very sad the further I get away from being a teenager, the more I see the connection with that fading out. I remember when I was about 21, 22 being really like, I remember what that was like and I'll never forget. I'll always be connected. And even when I was about 30 being like, I still know what it is. And now I'm a bit like, oh, do I? I'm busy. I'm a grown-up.
There's definitely little moments with youth culture where you go, as much as I pretend that I still know about youth culture because I know about various different alternative bands, etc., that actually isn't the full thing. No. There is a point where the distance from language and that moment where you go, well, the young people of today, and then you go, oh no, this is also part of what happens.
Why are they watching each other play video games? It makes no sense to me.
Whereas in the old days, they used to just drill holes in their motels that they lived in. And then I also read 3 Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch by Philip K. Dick, which is one of his spookiest ones, and also really made me. I know anyway, Philip K. Dick doesn't write the best female characters, but you do in that one really get almost every female character seems to be. She wasn't wearing a bra, but would she betray him? It just kind of that.
Isn't that? Did you hear that very interesting coincidence that him and Ursula Le Guin were in the same class, or they were in the same high school or something, but they didn't know each other, but they were like in exactly the same place as children. And she was like, yeah, he was a bit weird, no one really knew him. And then it's like, wow, and look at the two of you.
It's a great, if you read, I suppose, his one of his biographies with also then a biography of like Elvis Presley, like the Peter Guralnick ones, because again, you've got the twin thing going on.
But that is really interesting. I always forget who is contemporaneous. And then you can pick the most unlikely pairings of people and be like, oh, that person was born the year before that person, and look at their lives and yet they would have been dimly aware of the other. Isn't that mad?
I like that as well. That thing, like when you're saying Ursula K. Le Guin, and I must read the Left Hand of Darkness. I think is that the Left Hand of Darkness, the one that a lot of people. But that all the. When she died, there were all those that letter she wrote about the anthology, science fiction anthology, which they wanted an introduction for.
No, what is?
But it was all male writers, so she kind of went no, and she had a little comment about Brian Aldiss as well, and that was quite interesting because a chance for Brian Aldiss, whatever it was, to be rude or demean. But then I looked and I went, oh, actually, Brian Aldiss really loved some of her work, but because she also went into politics, because as far as I remember, I think she was. She's in a book I think called Mythmakers, something like Mythmakers and Taboo Breakers, which is all about interviews with writers with an anarchistic bent. So it includes Alan Moore in there as well. Sure.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Well, it's interesting because once politics enters your life, people that you would otherwise maybe have never had a beef with can sometimes have a beef with you just for that. I remember that quite clearly, suddenly sort of caring more about politics about 10 years ago, whatever, and then suddenly sort of having arguments with people that I would never consider having an argument with, because suddenly you're...
This is not what comedy's for, Josie. Why are you doing this with comedy?
Yeah, or even just people who you didn't realise had completely different political views to you, because why would you if all you're talking about is books? If all you're talking about is art in a very different... detached way or something. Yeah.
Anyway, that's part 2 of our January books. Oh, also Mercy on Me, which is the Nick Cave comic book. That's good.